It's 12:30 on Thursday, the 8th of January. Welcome back to Channel M's Lunchtime News, broadcasting from the MEN newsroom. These are today's headlines. The Cabinet come to the North West. Gordon Brown's brought his top ministers here for a meeting and to see what's important to people in our area.
It's really to get the Cabinet immersed in what the people of the North West are experiencing, are thinking, and what they think government should be doing.
Also a licence to print money, but the government denies reports it's planning to put more cash into circulation.
The Bank of England and the Chancellor have got to look at all the opportunities in terms of stimulating the economy.
Plus, rebuilding their lives, the couple whose home was reduced to rubble just before Christmas.
There's nothing there now whatsoever. All his memories are gone. This is where my house used to have been. It's hard to believe how I actually got away from that.
Good afternoon. Our top story. The Cabinet are in the North West right now. They're meeting here rather than in Downing Street, with ministers spending 3 days finding out what people in our area's needs are. It's being hosted by Beverly Hughes, and she tells us it's not an ordinary meeting.
The whole of the Cabinet will be doing visits during the morning. I'll be accompanying the Prime Minister on 3 visits before we have a wider event with between 80 and 100 people drawn from all different quarters, members of the public, professionals of various kinds, members of the local authority, business community, and that kind of stakeholder event, if you like, that event will be an opportunity in roundtable discussions for people to raise issues, ask questions, to get a response from the Prime Minister himself, from other Cabinet ministers. So it's really to get the Cabinet immersed in what the people of the North West are experiencing, are thinking, and what they think government should be doing.
Well, the day started with the Business Secretary, Lord Mandelson, visiting the Lowry. He was giving the go-ahead for a new £35 million business start-up programme for the North West. It's designed to give struggling firms more help. A school in Bury, once threatened with closure, has also had a visit now that it's back in the spotlight for all the right reasons. Broadoak Sports College welcomed not 1 but 2 ministers to look at ambitious plans for the school's future.
Aiming high. On this visit, the Education Secretary Ed Balls was leading by example. Together with the Children's Minister Beverly Hughes, he popped into a Year 9 basketball training session, as well as a hairdressing class at Broadoak Sports College in Bury. Afterwards, they met students on the school council for a question and answer session. Questions from the pupils ranged from how ministers thought they could tackle knife and gun problems to questions for Ed Balls on what it was like to be one half of the first couple in the Cabinet. Meanwhile, the ministers asked the students about their ambitions for the future.
I said politics, however, I'm not kind of sure, but after his visit I feel a bit more confident.
To be a PE teacher.
And is that at all influenced by the fact Broadoak is a sports college?
It has, mainly through the PE teachers. They've given me a good experience, and the facilities at Broadoak are just top class.
During a meeting with the head teacher, Ed Balls and Beverly Hughes discussed the school's bid to create a large community site that would include a primary school. Broadoak is hoping to get money from the government scheme Building Schools for the Future.
The school here has got very ambitious plans to link up with a local primary school, to bring in the university, local businesses, other health services, to raise aspirations, to continue the rising results they've had. I have to say, there's a sense of ambition here. People are really up for this project, and it seems to me and to Beverly Hughes, the minister who I've been here with today, this is really, really exciting. So I very, very much hope it's going to work out.
Ben Bland, Channel M News.
Well, we'll have more on the Cabinet's visit later in the programme. Let's bring you up to date on some breaking news this hour first. And the Bank of England has announced it's cutting interest rates to an all-time low. They've been reduced by 0.5% to 1.5%, putting them at their lowest level since the bank was founded in 1694. They've already been slashed since October from 5% as economic bosses try to deal with the deepening recession. Well, let's get some reaction to this now, and joining me is Mike Hanson, Chief Executive of the Vernon Building Society based in Stockport. Thank you very much for joining us this lunchtime. First of all, this interest rate cut, how much of a surprise is it?
It's not really a surprise. There are lots of pressures abounding at the moment that indicated that it should happen. If we look at the Bank of England, their job is to get inflation well under control but not to let it go too low, and because there's so much talk of recession and prices falling, they're worried that the inflation is going too low, and they want to encourage people to borrow and spend money and to raise it up again. We know the government's got pressures to reduce rates because they don't want to be seen to be presiding over an economy that's in trouble, so they want people to feel confident and to go out and spend. So a lot of pressure that said it should come down. The big unknown, of course, is that you alluded to the fact we've not been here for a long, long time, and people aren't quite sure now whether, as rates get so low, whether the actual real market that we operate in as a building society and people borrowing money and lending money, is that going to detach itself from the actual bank base rate? Because there's only a certain level you can go to, and if that happens, the government has a slight problem wondering what to do next.
Are you expecting many banks and building societies to pass this rate on? Because not all of the previous ones have been.
Indeed, and I know people accuse banks and building societies of profiteering. It's rather like when petrol goes up and down, everyone accuses people of lagging with the movements. But there are actually genuine reasons why it's been difficult to pass every rate on in full. So to answer your question, yes, they will, but I don't think it'll be the full amount. The key thing for most lenders, to state the obvious, most banks and building societies borrow money in, which you have to pay an interest rate on, and lend it out again. It's an obvious statement, but it's worth remembering because you have to pay a reasonable rate to get investment money in, and if you can't do that and it goes too low, you won't have the funds to borrow. So we have to protect that situation. OK, Mike Hanson from Vernon's Building Society, thank you very much for joining us. More on this in our early evening news from 5 o'clock tonight. Well, this comes on the day that there's been speculation the government could be about to print more money. Reports have suggested the Chancellor was considering putting billions of pounds more into circulation to help with the current economic problems, but he is now denying that. Here's business expert Kieran Maguire. Well, I'm very sorry we can't bring you that report. Let's bring you some more of the day's other top stories now, and we'll have more of the sports headlines later in the programme. But news is reaching us that Manchester United star Ronaldo has written off his Ferrari sports car after crashing into a roadside barrier in a tunnel near Manchester Airport. The player's not injured and has been speaking to police at the scene about what happened. A man's been stabbed to death at a house in Hume. Police found him with fatal injuries at 12:10 this morning on Bronte Street. 2 men have been arrested. One of them is in hospital being treated for serious injuries. Police looking for a missing pensioner in Stockport have found a body. 77-year-old Joan Canane was last seen on Boxing Day. She usually drove everywhere, but her car had been left on the driveway of her home in Heaton, Mersey. Investigators are trying to work out whether a fire on a bus in Flixton last night was started on purpose. The upper deck of the vehicle caught light shortly before 9 o'clock on Moorside Road. 4 passengers and the driver all escaped unhurt. Next, a couple from Oldham whose house was demolished in a gas blast are starting the slow process of rebuilding their lives. John Allen, who was badly burnt, and his wife Anne are trying to pick up the pieces even though they have nowhere to call home. Georgia Calvin-Smith has been to meet them.
There's nothing there now whatsoever. All his memories have gone. This is where my house used to have been. It's hard to believe how I actually got away from that. I'm ridiculous.
2 days before Christmas, John Allen's house was completely destroyed in a gas explosion. He was sitting in his front room at the time and was buried beneath the rubble after the first blast. His neighbours rushed to his aid, and not a minute too soon. Moments after he'd been pulled clear of the wreckage, the rest of his home collapsed. He was badly burned but escaped with his life. However, he and his wife have lost everything.
I just didn't believe how my husband got out of that. He shouldn't have been here. You know what I mean? He must have had angels round him. I just couldn't stop crying. Because the state of the house, it was total disaster. It's got everything what we had in it.
The couple and John's wheelchair-bound mother Pat have been left with nothing and have been forced to rely on the charity of others to get by. They're currently living in temporary accommodation until the council finds them a new home. But John is still suffering from the emotional impact of the accident.
I just don't feel as though that I'm the same person as what I used to be. Being happy. Now all I feel is just sadness.
The blast rocked the whole community, but neighbours have rallied round the couple to offer help and support.
We looked after Am and John were in hospital. There's been a lot of people what have turned up asking if they can help, if they've got anything in the houses, what can be donated, because they've lost everything, there's nothing left for them.
I'd like to thank everybody who was on that street, who helped, and who's been special friends. That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Telephone calls, what we've actually had at the moment is unbelievable. They've actually offered us furniture, chairs, tables, sweets. It's just thank you ever so much.
The reason for the blast is still being investigated, but with a little help from the kindness of strangers, John and Anne are determined to rebuild their lives. Georgia Calvin-Smith, Channel M News.
All right, let's take a look at the lunchtime sports headlines now with those details. Here's Sam Goodman.
Thank you, James. Well, within the past hour, Manchester City manager Mark Hughes has revealed Blackburn Rovers have rejected a bid in excess of £12 million for striker Roque Santa Cruz. Hughes is set to make an improved bid during the day. It also looks like the Blues will make an offer for Juventus striker David Trezeguet, according to the Frenchman's agent. Well, Mark Hughes has today explained his reasons for signing Chelsea defender Wayne Bridge, and in return, the left-back gave reason for his departure from Stamford Bridge.
He's certainly one of the top left-backs, not only in this country but in Europe as well. We're delighted that he's here. Obviously, I've watched his progress from the time we played alongside each other and seen him develop, seen him become a very successful Premier League player and an international player. He's the right quality. He's got the determination and the drive to show people exactly what he can do on a regular basis, week in, week out. And that's the type of player that we need here.
I had a string of games put together, but then Ashley comes straight back in, and I just felt that, you know, it was never going to work for me there. And you know, I was always on the phone to my agent saying, you know, I don't think it's going to happen. And it was the first time that he felt it wasn't as well. And you know, it was time to move.
And I'll have more from the both of them starting from in our bulletin, starting from 5 o'clock this afternoon. Meanwhile, Sir Alex Ferguson is fuming and has described his Manchester United side as lucky after only losing 1-0 against Derby County in their Carling Cup semi-final first leg last night. But he's promised his youngsters they'll get the chance to redeem themselves in the second leg at Old Trafford in 2 weeks' time. The Reds have made another signing today as well. Richie DeLayet is signed from Stoke City on a performance-related deal. The 20-year-old had been on loan at Wrexham earlier in the season. In rugby union, Manchester Evening News sports editor Pete Spencer was joined on this morning's breakfast show by Sale Sharks chief executive James Jennings. Peter grilled his guest about whether the Sharks had a long-term future in Stockport.
Are you definitely going to stay there?
Definitely is a very strong word, but I think for the foreseeable future of the future of Sale Rugby Club is linked to Edgeley Park. You know, we have plans to develop Edgeley Park, but obviously in the current economic climate it's not sensible or really viable to sort of progress those plans.
Do you think the council, who are benefiting from you being present in the town and all those people coming in from all over the country, you'd have to put some signs up so you can get to the game, wouldn't you?
We're working on that.
Well, you've been working on it for a while. If the council are watching, why don't you put signs up to say that's the home of Sale Sharks?
Staying with Sale, former skipper Jason White has revealed he's to leave the club for Clermont-Auvergne at the end of the current season, and we'll have more from Sale in Talking Sharks tonight from 7 o'clock. In cricket, Andrew Strauss has been named captain of the England squad following the resignation of Kevin Peterson yesterday. His first taste of captaincy will be in the Caribbean in just under 2 weeks. And finally, some lower league transfer news. Oldham midfielder Jean-Paul Kalala looks set to join Grimsby. Rochdale have taken Blackburn keeper Frank Fielding on a month's loan, and Brazilian World Cup winner Denilson begins his trial with Bolton Wanderers today in a bid to secure his first Premier League contract. Well, that's all from me for now. Join me again later on this evening with more sports news.
Sam, thank you very much indeed. Coming up between now and 1 o'clock, more on the Cabinet's visit to the North West, and we'll be meeting the former Bond girl who's been helping to kickstart the push to find entrance for this year's Great Manchester Run. More after the break. Welcome back to Channel M's Lunchtime News. We've got all of Greater Manchester's top stories for you between 12 and 1 o'clock every weekday. They're also online as well. Log on to channelm.co.uk. You can find all our main headlines on there, including our full debate from earlier this week with the Conservative leader David Cameron, and pictures as well from the final hours of Woolworths. That's at channelm.co.uk. Back to our top story now on the visit of Gordon Brown and all his cabinet to the northwest. They're holding a cabinet meeting here rather than in Downing Street and using it as an opportunity to speak to hundreds of people from around here about what their wants and needs are. Transport Secretary Jeff Hoon has been at Manchester Airport to officially open the new third platform there before travelling by train to Piccadilly. But he's used the opportunity to hit back at criticism from David Cameron about the failed congestion charging plan here in Greater Manchester. Here's Kevin Duffy.
Yes, thanks, James. Now, while Mr Hoon was here, he took the opportunity to have a go at the Conservative leader, David Cameron, who, of course, was in the Channel M studio just 2 days ago. At that time, Mr Cameron said that investment in public transport and the funding of it must be completely decoupled from congestion charging.
So where you've got good projects to spend that money should flow and the investment should go in.
Now, only a day before that, Mr Cameron also said that public spending has got to be reined in. Well, this morning, Jeff Hoon is calling that a contradiction, and he's called on the Conservative leader to explain himself.
Well, the Conservatives have made clear that they're going to cut the amount of money spent on transport. Then he comes to Manchester and says, oh, well, actually, we're going to spend more money in Manchester. Those things don't add up, and I think it's important that people realise that the Leader of the Opposition, playing his usual opportunist tricks, going around the country saying to people in Manchester and other places, oh, yes, we'll spend more money, but actually, nationally, making clear that he's going to cut the funding available for transport.
Well, while the politicians fight it out, it's worth remembering it was Jeff Hoon himself who said just a few weeks ago here in Manchester that without congestion charging, there would be no £3 billion worth of investment in Greater Manchester's public transport system. In Mr Hoon's words, there's no plan B. Back to you in the studio.
Well, the Shadow Transport Secretary, Theresa Villiers, hasn't responded to Jeff Hoon's criticism directly, but she has accused Labour of breaking its transport funding promises repeatedly. There are fears the conflict in Gaza could be about to spill out into other countries. At least 3 rockets have been fired into northern Israel from Lebanon. Israel replied with artillery fire but called the attack an isolated event. It follows a night of 60 airstrikes targeting Hamas sites as efforts carry on to get a ceasefire agreed. Police say a house fire in Salford last week was started on purpose. They're now looking for the arsonists responsible for the blaze on Mackenzie Road in Lower Kersal. 3 people were inside at the time when someone leaned through a broken window and set light to a curtain. 3 men have been charged with the theft of passports worth £2.5 million from a van in Chadderton. 3,000 blank ones and visas were stolen in the raid last July. The vehicle was targeted after the driver went to buy a newspaper and chocolate bar from a nearby shop. Those who've been accused are due before magistrates in Oldham. Former Bond girl Britt Ekland's been in town to officially open entries for the Great Manchester Run. 30,000 people are expected to take part in the 10k race in May. Beverly Walkden's been to meet her.
We're here in Spinningfields in Manchester, where stars have gathered to support the Bupa Greater Manchester Run. Just give us your own personal experience with Alzheimer's and how devastating it can be in the family unit.
My mother showed signs of confusion when she was probably in her late 50s, and we just put it down to her being eccentric. And then it got worse and worse and worse, and she finally had a physical breakdown, and about 6 years later, and the doctors did diagnose her with Alzheimer's, which we had no idea what it was, and they didn't really know what it was. They just said she has Alzheimer's and there's no cure, and sent her home. And so it was really up to us to try and cope as a family with no outside help. I have 3 brothers, so between us we did it. But it was horrendous, and you just saw her sliding more and more into a life where we didn't fit in or belong, because we had no communication with her, although she was sitting like you and me. Hopefully going to raise money for Alzheimer's, and that's where I come in, because I'm a patron of Alzheimer's Society, and I'm not personally a runner. I'm a walker, so if on the day I'm in the country I could walk it maybe. But we hope that a lot of people will sign up, with sponsors obviously, and raise a lot of money for the Alzheimer's Society.
McDonald's is to give its staff the chance to take up an apprenticeship in running a burger bar. 6,000 members of staff will be able to study for the qualification every year. It's equivalent to 5 GCSEs and includes things like handling money, stock control and customer service. Earlier on I spoke to Sarah Ross from the careers service Connexions.
I think any employer, particularly in the current economic climate, who's valuing their staff enough to invest in training and to give people, particularly young people, skills that will be of value to them both now and in the future, I find it difficult to understand how or why people would criticise an initiative such as that, to be honest. The government is very keen to see apprenticeships and to see an increase in the numbers of young people on apprenticeships, as are we in Manchester. Manchester's currently one of only 3 pilot areas nationally to look at trying to offer guaranteed apprenticeships for young people. So apprenticeships are positive, they're very positive for young people in the city, and we would love to see more employers taking McDonald's lead.
Former United star George Best has been added to the online Oxford Dictionary of National Biography. The site details the lives of some of the country's most famous names. It details how the Belfast-born footballer joined the Reds as a teenager, but then after his playing days ended, his life descended into alcoholism. It's claimed stress at school is driving more teenagers to turn to cigarettes and alcohol. Researchers in Salford have been studying 15-year-olds at a school there and say the pressure of GCSEs is a particular problem.
The presentation today, it gives insight into the main factors that the young people identified as causing them stress. And I think nationally you will find that when young people are stressed, they do engage in certain types of behaviours to try and cope with stress. And as was identified in the research, some will use some maladaptive copings, but the majority have identified themselves as using healthy coping strategies. So although a high percentage identify themselves as having medium levels of stress and a small percentage experience high levels of stress, I think it's important that we help those who experience high levels of stress to develop healthy coping strategies as opposed to relying on maladaptive strategies which will in fact affect their general health.
Well, this morning's been much milder than the last couple of days here in Manchester. Taking a check on how the next few days are shaping up, here's Michelle Eagleton.
Well, it's been another cold one this morning, and this afternoon is no different. We're seeing highs of between 3 and 5 degrees, and although it is a bit milder than yesterday, it's going to feel exactly the same because there's a westerly wind coming in that's very, very frosty and cold indeed. In fact, we saw a bit of snow this morning. It's still lingering in some places. Now, the next couple of days are a bit of a mixed bag for you. Now, tomorrow we are going to see a fair bit of rain on its way. Friday and Saturday, surprisingly sunshine, and then on Sunday, lots of cloud.
This is Channel M's Lunchtime News, our main headlines this afternoon, and while we've been on air, interest rates have been cut to their lowest level since records began more than 300 years ago. They now stand at 1.5%, down half a percentage point. The Bank of England's made the decision in response to the deepening recession. Members of the Cabinet are here in the North West for one of their meetings away from Downing Street. They're here on a 3-day trip listening to ordinary people tell them about their wants and needs. We'll have more on those stories and all of the rest of the day's news with Andy Crane from 5, but from me and the Lunchtime team, have a good afternoon. Bye-bye for now.